How far would you go to survive? It's a question that's often discussed in the theoretical, as a macabre sort of party game or thought experiment. However, for one rugby team on a flight in the 1970s, it became a horrifying reality. Today, we're embarking on the tragedy of the Andes flight disaster, the real-life Society of the Snow. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel. After that, leave a comment and let us know what other disasters you would like to hear about. Okay, how far would you go to stay alive? On October 13, 1972, a plane carrying 45 passengers, including the Old Christians Uruguayan rugby team, crashed in the Andes between Chile and Argentina. The survivors believed they would be rescued within days. They could not have predicted how long their ordeal would last, nor that they would become known around the world as the Andes Mountain Cannibals. Of the 27 passengers who survived the impact, only 16 remained when they were finally rescued over 2 months after the crash. Their plight has been referred to as the Miracle of the Andes, a reference to the incredible odds many of them beat to eventually return home. By the time they were rescued, search parties had been called off. Many in the group were spiritual and prayed to God for guidance. But they were starving, and while it couldn't have been an easy decision, they had to sustain themselves on the frozen remains of their co-passengers to stay alive. Following their rescue, the Uruguay rugby team's cannibalism made headlines all over the world. Many were stunned by their actions. Several of the survivors wrote books, and the movie Alive and the more recent Society of the Snow are both based on their traumatic incident. En route to a rugby match in Chile, the athletes aboard the flight weren't that alarmed when the pilot told them that they were about to encounter turbulence. One of the passengers, 19-year-old medical student Roberto Canesa, recalled that someone near him said, "Aren't we flying too close to the mountains?" A moment later, while still high among the Andes, the pilot turned north to descend into Santiago, Chile, but miscalculated the height of the nearby mountains. In an attempt to gain altitude, he tilted the plane nearly fully vertical, which caused the plane to stall. It sputtered and then descended, hitting the mountainside. When the plane finally came to a stop, the seats pushed forward in a domino effect towards the cockpit. Canesa remembered how jet fuel and screams filled the air as the fuselage broke apart. The team and their family and friends aboard the flight were surrounded by mountains amid a raging blizzard. Canesa, who wrote a memoir about the incident titled "I Had to Survive: How a Plane Crash in the Andes Inspired My Calling to Save Lives," said that his body lurched forward upon impact, and he struck his head. His first thought was that he was not going to survive. He held onto his seat and began to pray. After the immediate trauma of the crash into the Andes Mountains, the remaining individuals gathered whatever food and warm clothes they could find. They were convinced a rescue would arrive swiftly, so they took their empty suitcases and constructed a cross that could be easily seen. They also attempted to use their footsteps to write out an SOS message for planes flying overhead. Their second day in the Andes, they heard 2 aircraft fly over them. Elated, they felt sure it was a rescue, but day after day came and went with no sign of help. Out of the 45 people who were on the plane, 12 perished in the crash. 5 more passed away within hours. Another person succumbed a week later to their injuries. On the 17th day, a sudden avalanche swept over the crash site, claiming 8 more. This is when things began to look especially dire. The survivors struggled desperately due to a lack of food. Trapped at an altitude of 11,800 feet, they were fighting a war on 2 fronts: freezing and starvation. The survivors resorted to many clever devices to stay alive. They melted snow for drinking water using a section of aluminum from one of the seats. They needed blankets. The plane's wool seat covers served as blankets, and the seat bottoms made serviceable snowshoes. They packed suitcases into the fuselage to block the cold air, and made sunglasses from plastic they found in the pilot's cabin. To accommodate people with broken legs, they made hammocks. For everyone else, they made sleeping bags from insulation in the plane's kitchen, and they relieved themselves inside rugby balls, because if they tried to answer nature's call outside, their urine would freeze. Canesa, who is now a doctor, used his then-developing skills to nurse the injured. He drained fluids and stabilized fractured bones. 9 days after the crash, the survivors' biggest problem became a total lack of food. Everything they found on the plane was gone. The land around them provided neither vegetation nor animals to sustain them. Within days, they were feeling the signs of starvation. The survivors knew that if they waited too long to eat, they would be too weak to survive. But the remains of the deceased passengers lay preserved in the packed snow away from the fuselage. The solution was grimly obvious. Canessa knew human flesh contains protein and fat, similar to any other kind of meat, and that it would sustain the starving passengers. Due to his medical background, he was the first to cut into a corpse using a shard of glass. Canessa wrote in his memoir of the mental barrier he discovered in eating his friend's remains. It was one thing to be hungry and know you need food. It was another to know the food in one's hand is a loved one. The process was emotionally taxing on all of the survivors. To cope with these drastic measures, Canessa and the others reasoned that if the situation were reversed, they'd want their own remains to be used similarly. Canessa felt the act of consuming their fallen comrades connected them both physically and spiritually. The survivors then agreed that if they perished, they would willingly donate their remains to the group so they could live. During the avalanche that hit on day 17, the frozen remains being used for food were swept away. The avalanche claimed 8 more lives as well, and the survivors faced another agonizing decision to consume friends who had only hours previously been living and breathing. While stranded, the team wasn't totally insulated from the outside world. They used a transistor radio to hear about the search efforts being made for them. On October 23, 1972, they heard the news they most regretted. After over 100 attempts to locate them, authorities were calling off the search. Canessa, Nando Parado, and Antonio Tintin Vizantin decided to hike to find help. They reached the top of the mountain but realized they were still quite far from safety. Tintin returned to the plane so Canessa and Parado could better divide their meager food rations. At night, they endured temperatures reaching 10 degrees below zero. After 6 days, they encountered water and grass and were confident they were going to survive. Canessa and Parado hiked for 10 days before they found someone to help them. In all, the pair traveled 44 miles. It was 70 days after the initial plane crash when they finally reached civilization. The 2 men led authorities to the crash site, where the rest of the survivors were saved. After Canessa and Parado hiked their way to safety, 2 helicopters were sent to find the survivors still living in the plane's wreckage on December 22, 1972. 6 people were immediately flown home, but 8 others had to wait until the next day due to poor weather conditions. The rescue made headlines, but quickly shifted from amazement to disgust as word got out about what the survivors had to do to survive. When the survivors explained that they had treated the consumption of their friends as an act of communion, like the Last Supper, the Catholic Church absolved them of their sins. After the rescue, Canessa set out to meet the parents of those who had perished. He felt strongly about telling them the survivors' side of the story and brought them letters the deceased had written before they passed away. In the end, he was met with forgiveness and understanding from the families of the victims. Ultimately, the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 is one of triumph, tragedy, and sacrifice. Of course, with a story as incredible as the miracle in the Andes, there was bound to be a movie. To date, the story has received not 1, but 3 different film adaptations. The first, Survive, was directed by Mexican filmmaker René Cardona. Notably, Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars, but noted that the movie, quote, does respect its subject matter, and so we have to also. The second, Alive, was directed by Frank Marshall and starred Ethan Hawke. This version was a box office success, but has been criticized for depicting a sanitized and palatable version of the real-world events. The most recent movie, Society of the Snow, directed by J.A. Bayona, was praised for its dedication to the facts, but received some complaints that it focused too much on the drama of the situation, rather than the real-life people who went through it. So what do you think? Would you be able to survive 2 months in the wilderness? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.